What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel, and today we're going to do a viewer requested video. A couple people have discussed this in my comment sections about the differences between building a team in a full simulation league versus building a team in a competitive league. And so I'm going to be in this competitive league for an example for you guys here today that I'm the Rams in, and we're just going to look at players and discuss some of the differences between what is necessary in a simulation league versus what is necessary in a competitive league. There are a few similarities, there are a few differences, and some points that I think are worthwhile to hit on for you guys to be successful in whichever type of league you are going to be doing. So the first point that I want to bring up is that in simulation leagues, there are a couple stats that I've told you guys on my channel for a long time that literally don't matter whatsoever, or don't matter very much. That will matter in simulation leagues. And so a great example of this would be looking at a defensive player. Maybe if we look at John Johnson, for example. In a regular competitive league, there are a couple stats that aren't going to matter as much as they league. The key here is it depends on which players you guys are using. So I guess maybe John Johnson isn't the best example. He's more of an example of stats that will you'll want to remain the same. But let's talk about the quarterback, for example. In a competitive league, you are always going to have control of the quarterback, and so certain stats aren't going to make a difference for you. That would be your awareness stat. Let's see. So, oh, excuse me. Your awareness stat doesn't matter. Play recognition for players on defense that you use or control doesn't matter. And I'm actually going to scroll through here and just see all the stats so we can kind of make sure that we hit on all of them. So your awareness obviously isn't going to matter for user-controlled players, but in a simulation league, all of your players are CPU-controlled, and so their awareness is going to affect how they play. Likewise, for CPU-controlled players in a competitive league, their awareness will matter. Things like ball carrier vision for the halfback and for your quarterback, and your wide receivers, that's not going to matter in a competitive league because you will always have control of the ball carrier. You will always be telling them where to go. You will be inputting with your buttons and the sticks to tell them where to go, and therefore the ball carrier vision does not matter. It only artificially inflates rates or overalls for competitive leagues. However, on simulation, if a player has a good ball, the correct path, I guess. So those are a couple of the stats. On defense, I had mentioned their play recognition. Play recognition isn't going to matter for user-controlled defensive players, and I must have went past it, because you're going to be user deciding whether it's a run or a pass and telling the player where to go. But in a CPU league, the play recognition stat matters. Likewise, for pass coverage type of players, if you're using a safety or using a corner or something like that, their man coverage, zone coverage, and stats like that, their pursuit, those things will not matter for user-controlled players because you control whether you pursue the ball carrier, you control whether you're in man coverage and you're on top of the guy or you're missing the ball or something like that. But in a CPU-controlled league, those stats are going to affect how a player plays, and you're going to have to weigh those more than you would in a competitive league. And those are where the main position by position basis. So a great example to start with of a similarity excuse me, is an offensive lineman. Well, offensive linemen, for the most part, are going to play the same on simulation and on competitive. They need to be good all around. And, there are certain positions that utilize run blocking more than pass blocking and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, because they are not user-controlled players, you want them to have good awareness. You want them to have good, well-rounded stats. Otherwise, they're not going to be very good. And it's going to play the same in full simulation leagues versus competitive leagues. If you have an offensive lineman that has really bad awareness and really bad blocking stats, they're still going to perform bad no matter which category category you're in. Now, the one thing that I will say is that in a competitive league, you can kind of get away with worse overall alignment, and the reason being is that you're going to have better vision in terms of where you're going to go with the ball, where you can avoid some of those bad blocks and stuff like that, whereas the CPU is pretty much going to play it very similar every single time, and they'll run into some of those bad blocks. They won't shy away from them. They'll juke out of it and juke backwards and do all types of wonky stuff. So if you're in a full simulation league, especially one that is, you're actually viewing the game in broadcast style gameplay, you're going to want to start by building a good offensive line, because that's going to be the key for everything on offense. If you have bad pass blockers in the center, left tackle, or right tackle position, you're going to get sacked a lot. If you have bad run blockers in these positions, you're going to notice your running back get tackled in the backfield a lot, because, all of these positions need to be able to run block for you. And it's very similar like that in competitive leagues, because, like I said, they're not user controlled. Now let's talk about some of the other attributes that kind of are different, and that's going to be where we talk about some of the skill positions, where, prior to getting into some simulation leagues, I mainly would have told you that certain stats don't matter. Like awareness doesn't really matter. Awareness, it matters a little bit for skill positions like receivers and stuff like that, because it's going to determine whether they look back at the ball and actually catch the ball or not. But you only need a certain threshold for that. You don't need a guy to have 99 awareness to come back and look for the ball. But if you have a guy that has 60 awareness in a competitive league, they're not going to really turn around. They're just going to let the ball hit them in the helmet, and then you're going to be like, well, what the heck? Why'd you just let that ball hit you and not even try to catch it? I've had that happen many times, and that's kind of one of the differences. But in a full simulation league, if you don't have high awareness on your players, they're not going to do their job as well. So you want to have a decent awareness stat on pretty much all of your players in simulation leagues. When we talk about tight ends, for example, tight ends are very similar across the board, but one of the things that you want to consider is you can get away with slower tight ends in competitive leagues, and likewise you can get away with lower statted players in competitive leagues. I could get away with really low overall wide receivers, guys like Jalen Hurd, guys that just have good agility and good route running or good release. You can kind of utilize those guys in a certain way to get them open and throw them the ball. However, if they're not statted up in a competitive or in a simulation league, they're not going to get open. They're not going to catch balls as much. And so with these skill positions, their stats really do matter, and speed matters quite a bit. So in a simulation league, if you can get a faster tight end, they'll get open more. If you can get fast receivers, they'll get open more, because they will get those mismatches, and from what I've seen in simulation leagues, speed is deadly. Catching doesn't matter quite as much as you would think. Generally speaking, from my experience, the quarterback is going to be throwing to a lot of open wide receivers. If they do throw it into traffic, it's 9 times out of 10 going to be an incompletion no matter what. So unless you have a really high overall receiver like a Cooper Kupp or somebody, or a Gerald Everett, they're not going to come down with it anyway. So speed is something you want to look for. You want to look for players that have good awareness, but you want to look for more of a well-rounded player, because what I've noticed in a lot of simulation leagues is you'll see a lot of guys that have like 90 speed, but then they have like 85 acceleration or 85 agility, and that's going to hurt them. That's going to prevent that's going to prevent them from getting off the ball. It's going to prevent them from breaking in their routes, and it's going to prevent them from getting open. It's going to allow the defenders to cover them easier. So I highly recommend you guys look for well-rounded athletic players, but players that also have decent stats in other categories. You're really, from my experience, not really going to be able to get away with lower overall players that are weak in certain areas, weak in, release, or weak in acceleration, or things like that, weak in awareness, because I find that guys that are weak in those categories don't catch the ball as often, and they don't really pay attention as much. Now, in terms of the quarterback, this is one where things like awareness come into play a lot, because this is where, like I said before, if you're user controlling a quarterback in a competitive league, their awareness some of their traits don't quite matter. If we go to edit Kyler Murray here and look at his traits, if it stops being slow, he has like the throw ball away trait, force pass trait and stuff like that. Those don't matter for a competitive league because you're in charge of whether the quarterback throws the ball away or not. You're in charge of whether you force the ball into tight coverage. But for a simulation league, you really want to pay attention to these things because if a player doesn't have the throw ball away trait, they're not going to throw it away. And if they don't have the right force passes trait, you might see them throwing risky throws all the time and getting interceptions because of it. And so when you're evaluating a quarterback, especially for a simulation league, you want to keep these things into account. You want to take them into account because they are really, really important for those things. Likewise, what I said in terms of awareness, if a quarterback doesn't have good awareness in a simulation league, they're not going to find their receivers as easily. So you want to have a quarterback that has good awareness, but the difference is that in a competitive league, the awareness doesn't matter. I could have a quarterback with one awareness and he would still complete passes because I'm the one controlling him and I'm the one deciding which wide receiver to throw to. And then we can talk about the running back position. The running back position is very similar in where there are some traits that are going to be really important for you in a simulation league that aren't going to be important for you otherwise. And we had already discussed this earlier in the video. Ball carrier vision, awareness, things like that are going to be really important for whether your running back finds the right hole and gets the most yardage that they can. So I've noticed that realistically speaking, players that have good ball carrier vision and players that have like 90 plus speed are going to be effective running backs regardless of what their other stats are. It's nice to have good juke moves or spin moves, but I find that a lot of times when my running back in a simulation league is making a move, it is pretty much not helpful. There are times where it's useful in the open field, but for the most part, it's really not that effective. So I'm looking for a guy that has decent athletic ability. Good acceleration is the key here, and then good ball carrier vision and awareness, because then they'll be able to get the yards that I need them to, 4 or 5 plus yards per carry. And that's pretty much what the difference is with running backs. In terms of running backs, they're very much like wide receivers or quarterbacks or whatever you might find in a competitive league, in that those stats don't matter. It's pretty much athleticism that matters in terms of a competitive league, because I could use a 75 overall running back as long as he's athletic, as long as he can, get upfield and make the jukes and stuff that I want him to. He doesn't have to be a high overall. But in a simulation league, overalls are going to matter a little bit more. The higher overall players are going to perform better, generally speaking. But in simulation leagues, I've seen players that are slower. If you have a running back that has like 86 speed or something like that, they're not really going to perform well because they're just not going to be faster than the other players on the field. And, you're not they're not user controlled, so you can't compensate for that. Like with a slow running back, I can compensate. I know how to use him. I can only run between the tackles and hold the stick forward to get a truck pretty much every time and fall forward. But whenever you're doing a simulation league, that running back's going to be trying to play running back like a fast running back and trying to find holes, and it's going to lead to them getting tackled in the backfield a lot. So I highly recommend you pay attention to a player's athleticism, because the speed, like I said, with tight ends and wide receivers and all those positions, speed matters a lot. And then the other thing that I would discuss is in simulation leagues, I try to have a pocket passer quarterback. I've seen success with running quarterbacks, but for the most part, I've seen that having a running quarterback can cost you a lot in a simulation league. So you're taking a chance if you go with a mobile quarterback. Generally speaking, I would stick with somebody that's more of a pocket passer type, to be honest with you, because when players in simulation leagues start to get outside of the pocket and start to run away, they do a lot of wonky stuff. They'll stop and think about it, and then they'll start running again, and it really can create problems for you. So I would make sure that you're paying attention to that. Stats for fullbacks, I know a lot of you probably don't care, but I do care. Fullbacks are pretty much exactly the same because they are CPU controlled pretty much no matter what. You need them to have good awareness so that they can get onto the person that they're trying to block, good impact blocking, and good lead block. That's pretty much what matters for them. In terms of defensive, most of the stuff is going to be pretty much the same across the board between competitive and simulation leagues. You need players that are athletic. In simulation leagues especially, you can't get away with having slower players as much. You need players that can keep up with the wide receivers, so you're going to want to have guys that have 90 plus speed, 90 plus agility, and 90 plus acceleration. If you don't, they're not going to be as competitive. I've noticed that in my simulation leagues, guys that aren't as athletic, they tend to just get ran by a lot. They tend to not make a lot of plays. They tend to not have a lot of tackles and things like that. So you want to focus on athletic players. Now, in terms of the secondary, free safety and strong safety, you can get away with slightly slower players, but I would say you don't want anybody below like 87 speed. John Johnson's probably like the baseline for where you want as a bottom level speed as a strong safety is like 87. Anything 87 and above is decent, but like I said, you want well-rounded players that have both good speed and acceleration, and generally speaking, agility is useful for your corners as well because it allows them to track the receivers, break in and out with them, and change direction. In terms of your defensive linemen, I find that block shedding is really important with defensive linemen in a simulation league as it is with a competitive league. Defensive linemen, from my standpoint, pretty much play the same across the board. They will get off blocks if they've got good block shedding and good power or finesse moves, and they are quicker to get to the quarterback and quicker to cause pressure if they have good speed and acceleration. So a guy like Aaron Donald has the ideal speed and acceleration to get to the quarterback. If you're playing with guys that have speed in the 70s, you're probably not going to get to the quarterback very often, like in the Bulldogs League that you guys have probably seen a little bit of in the RFL. You guys know that I have that Jack Brody in D tackle that's really good. He's got really good block shed. He makes all types of plays in the run game, and he's actually a good power rusher as well. He's just so slow that he can't get to the quarterback. He's constantly getting into the backfield whenever the quarterback's dropping back to pass, but because he only has like 60 or 70 speed or something like that, he just can't get to the quarterback in time. So you're really going to want to focus on faster pass rushers, whether you're pass rushing with the D-line or the linebackers. You want to have guys like a Samson Abukum that have 88 speed and 93 acceleration, or Montez Sweat, guys that have 90 plus speed. Those guys off the edge are going to be really deadly because if they get off their block, they're getting to the quarterback pretty much 9 times out of 10. Whereas if you have guys that are a little bit slower, guys like a Damon Harrison Sr., if they get off their block, chances are they're not getting to the quarterback. Like, yeah, it's nice that he got off his block, but what does it matter if he can't actually get the pressure on the quarterback? So you want to focus on guys that have decent speed. I can actually probably pop over into that Bulldogs League for you guys real quick and just show you some of my theory with what's going on with it. I haven't been able to get a whole lot of pass rush because I just simply don't have very many players that are good at pass rushing, but what I can show you is that I have one player that I kind of added as a pass rusher that has been very successful for me. And sorry, I just loaded up the wrong league. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty here trying to find the correct league. So if I load up the RFL Season 5 and I go down to my roster, you'll see from a stats standpoint, defensively speaking, the player that has the most sacks isn't even all that good. From a sack perspective, Riley Draft I brought in as a unsigned or an undrafted practice squad type of player, and he has 4 sacks for me. And as you guys can see, that Jack Brody that I had talked about, very good in the run game. Ton of tackles for loss, but only 1 sack. He does get off blocks a lot, but he doesn't play that well in terms of pass rush. But this Riley Draft does. And let me show you why that guy is actually getting sacks. The reason that he is getting sacks for my defense is that he's super athletic. And so when he does get into the backfield, whenever he does get at the quarterback, he's pretty much locked up in terms of getting a sack. So let's take a look at him real quick. He's not a super good player, only like a 73 overall, only 80 finesse moves, not very good block shedding, but he's got 87 speed and 87 acceleration. This is the type of guy that you want to have in a simulation league because because it means that when they actually get off their block, they'll get there. Now, don't get me wrong, you want to increase that block shedding stat, you want to increase that finesse move stat or power move, but you want to have people that Ishmael in this league. He is super unathletic. He's only got 78 speed for a linebacker, which just isn't very good. I'm kind of considering moving him to D-end. I just don't have a spot open for him right now. He's got very good stats. He's got good tackling, good hit power, good pursuit, good block shedding and stuff like that, good strength, but he just does not play that well because people just run by him. When you think about the difference in speed, as a 78 speed player, even if you have the speed sliders, the speed threshold set to whatever the base is, this 78 speed player is going to get run by a 90 speed halfback or a 90 speed wide receiver, an 85 speed tight end. He just can't keep up. And so unless a player is running right at him, he's not really going to be very effective. And that's the thing that you have to understand with simulation leagues, is that it's all about athleticism, especially on defense. If your players aren't athletic, they're not going to make plays the way that you would expect them to. Like I said, this guy's probably a candidate to move to D-end, because if he plays D-line, I mean, he's got good enough strength, he's got good block shed, and 78 speed for a D-lineman is actually not half bad. So, that would be kind of where I think would be an ideal spot for him, but I really just don't have a spot for him at the moment. I might consider moving back to a 4-3 just to see what happens with that, but then I wouldn't have Riley Draft rushing as an outside linebacker. I'd have to move him to D-end, and then there goes my fourth D-end spot, or my D-lineman spot. But that's pretty much what you're going to be looking for in terms of the differences between a simulation league and a competitive league. You're going to be looking a lot for the awareness of the players. Players that play really well for you are players that are a combination of athletic and pay attention. So a good example, Carlos Gent, very athletic player, good coverage abilities, not the greatest coverage abilities in the world, but he plays very well for me, and he's got 82 awareness. He doesn't have to have super good coverage abilities, but he's athletic, which is what I like to see, and he's got good awareness and good play recognition, so he's able to, actually track stuff down and figure out what the play is and make a play on the ball. Like I said, in a simulation league, the players are playing for themselves. You're not controlling them, at least in a competitive league, you have control over some players, and so you can make up for that. If I had a Carlos Gent in a competitive league, as you guys may know, I would just let him play on his own. I wouldn't user control him. What I would user control is I would user control the players like Riley Draft or the players like Ike Page that are raw athletically, very good athletic talent, but don't have the intangibles to kind of make up for it to be able to play on their own. So Ike Page, for example, very fast, very good acceleration, very good athlete, but he doesn't have the greatest coverage stats, he doesn't have very good awareness, and his play recognition is only a 65. So this would be a really good candidate for a user-controlled player in a league, and you could certainly do really, really well with a guy like this. A guy with 94 speed, you could get all types of interceptions, you could pick off, you could bait pick the AI, you could bait pick other users. You could make this guy into like an MVP type of player. But in a simulation league, that's just not going to be the case. Now, he'll play pretty well because of his abilities, and he's got decent intangibles. But you're going to want to get up that play recognition and that awareness stat, because if you don't, he's not going to play as well as you would hope. He's not going to play as well as in a competitive league. So those are some of the differences. If you guys want even more in-depth breakdowns on certain positions or anything like that, feel free to leave it down, your comments down in the comment section, and I'll address those, and we'll either talk about them or I'll make a video on them. If you guys want to see anything more in regards to simulation leagues, feel free to let me know down in the comment section. Like I said, leave a like on the video if this did help you guys out in some way, or if it's some valuable information to you. Subscribe to the channel here if you're new, and as always, comment down below, and I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you in the next video.